In the vast silence of the Mongolian steppe, where the horizon stretches farther than the eye can see and the wind brushes across open grasslands like a whisper, a rider gallops alone. He's not a warrior. He's not a merchant. He carries no sword. What he carries instead is a small pouch of leather, bound tightly and stamped with the tamga of the great Khan. Inside it, a letter. And for that letter, an entire empire has built a system. This is the story of the Yam, the Mongol Empire's extraordinary postal relay system, a sprawling, invisible web of roads, horses, and yurts that stitch together the largest land empire the world has ever known. It wasn't glorious like conquest. It wasn't romantic like trade. But it was vital. Without the Yam, Genghis Khan's empire would have shattered under its own weight. And so, this story begins not with battle, but with a problem. How do you send a message from Karakoram to Bokhara, across 3,000 kilometers of hostile terrain, and still expect it to arrive in less than 2 weeks? The problem of distance. In the early 13th century, Genghis Khan faced a unique problem. He was no longer a tribal leader chasing rival clans across the steppe. He had become the ruler of a rapidly expanding empire, stretching from the Yellow River in China to the Caspian Sea. Orders had to be issued. Updates had to be received. Intelligence needed to flow faster than any army could march. Without communication, governance would break down. And so, Genghis did what he always did when faced with a logistical problem: he borrowed, adapted, and improved. The idea of relay stations wasn't new. Ancient Persia had had them. The Tang dynasty in China had refined them. But the Mongols, with their obsession for efficiency and mobility, transformed this concept into something almost mechanical in its precision. The Yam, pronounced Yam, was both a system and an institution. At its core, it was a series of relay stations, spaced roughly 25 to 40 kilometers apart, the maximum distance a horse could travel at full gallop without needing rest. Each station housed a supply of fresh horses, food, yurts for shelter, and sometimes spare gear or guards. A messenger riding for the Yam would arrive at a station, switch to a new horse, and continue without delay. With this method, couriers could cover up to 200 to 300 kilometers a day, a rate unheard of in most parts of the world until the 19th century. In some cases, the Yam operated almost like a modern highway system. There were main roads that linked the empire's major centers: Karakoram, Samarkand, Tabriz, Kanbalik, Beijing, and secondary roads that connected minor settlements. Along these, a mixture of official messengers, tax collectors, military couriers, and spies passed information that maintained the empire's central control. To ensure smooth operation, Genghis Khan created a bureaucratic infrastructure that would have made a Roman governor proud. Certain families were designated as station keepers. Their job was hereditary and tax-exempt, but they were required to keep horses ready, food stocked, and paths clear at all times. These keepers were monitored by inspectors known as jarguchi, who could appear at any time to assess performance. If horses were too thin or a relay station fell into disrepair, punishment could be swift and severe. The efficiency of the Yam depended on discipline and fear as much as it did on logistics. To use the system, messengers carried a special peza, or bronze tablet, inscribed with imperial authority. The peza granted free passage, food, shelter, and the right to commandeer supplies as needed. Abuse of the peza was a constant concern, so much so that later Khans had to limit their distribution. No discussion of the Yam would be complete without its most critical component, the Mongol horse. These were small, stocky, semi-wild animals that could survive in harsh conditions and go without water for days. Every station had a herd of reserve horses, carefully rotated and managed. When a rider arrived, he would dismount, passed the message to the station keeper, and be handed a fresh horse. This horse was already saddled, trained, and knew the route ahead. The rider didn't stop to eat. Meals were often consumed in the saddle. Yurts along the route served as quick sleeping shelters, though many couriers rode through the night. This system allowed messages to travel at speeds that rivaled modern mail trucks, but without roads, engines, or GPS. The real genius of the yam wasn't just its speed, it was the way it allowed the Khan to maintain centralized control over a decentralized empire. Regional governors were in constant contact with the capital. Reports from spies and generals arrived in time to shape policy. Orders from the Khan could be sent across thousands of kilometers in days, not months. It also enabled intelligence gathering. Each station served as a listening post, collecting rumors, recording troop movements, and passing it along the chain. The Mongols didn't just control territory, they monitored it, mapped it, and recorded it. To many Mongols, the yam wasn't glamorous. It was boring. Station keeping was a lowly but essential job. Riders were usually drawn from the lower aristocracy or from conquered peoples trained in horsemanship. But without them, the Mongol machine would have stalled. Later empires, from the Ming dynasty in China to the Ottoman Empire, looked to the yam as a model. Even Marco Polo, who used it during his travels, wrote about its efficiency with awe, noting that he had never seen such speed and discipline in message delivery. But even as it expanded, the yam began to show cracks. Corruption crept in. Peasas were forged or traded, stations were looted or neglected. Horses went missing. And as the empire fragmented in the late 13th and early 14th centuries, so too did the coherence of the yam. Yet at its height, it was an astonishing feat of quiet logistics, a network so well-oiled that you could send a letter across Asia faster than most armies could march. And all of it began with one question. How do you keep an empire together when its cities are weeks apart by foot? That question launched a relay system of riders, yurts, and horses that made the Mongol Empire not just feared, but connected. In the silence between hoofbeats, the world of the yam came alive not in cities or palaces, but in the quiet intervals between them. If you were to step off your horse and linger at one of the Mongol Empire's thousands of relay stations, you'd find a small, self-contained world, one that was more about survival, routine, and slow endurance than excitement. The Mongol postal relay system was a marvel of speed, yes. But behind that speed was an infrastructure built on staggering amounts of planning, animal care, and human effort. And most of it happened in yurts, mud brick posts, and open-air shelters that dotted the lonely steppes like forgotten punctuation marks in a massive imperial sentence. This is what life was like inside one of those relay stations, the heartbeat of an empire powered by hay, sweat, and discipline. Each relay station, known as an ortage or simply part of the broader yam network, was usually located 25 to 40 kilometers from the next. The placement wasn't arbitrary. It was based on horse endurance, terrain, and political geography. Flat plains allowed for longer gaps, mountains or rivers required tighter placement. You would arrive after hours of riding, wind-chapped, dust-covered, muscles sore. But the moment your horse slowed, station keepers would be at the ready. A fresh horse, already saddled, was waiting. You might exchange a few words, but you wouldn't linger. Your job wasn't to rest, it was to move. If you were a station keeper, however, your entire life revolved around waiting. Waiting for couriers, waiting for grain shipments, waiting for inspections. Your job was to maintain this little node in the vast arterial network. Some stations were simple, a felt yurt, a corral, a few hay bales, and a cooking fire. Others, in wealthier or more central regions, had wooden posts, watchtowers, guard barracks, and even stone walls. But all shared the same components. A supply of horses, at least a dozen at all times. Food storage, for both men and animals. Spare saddles, boots, and tools. A written ledger noting every visitor and message passed. A flag or carved pole marking imperial authority. Each horse was more than just transportation. They were logistical assets, numbered, recorded, rotated, and inspected. They grazed freely in nearby pastures but were rounded up daily, trained to respond to whistles or calls. Station keepers knew each one by name. They understood which horses had better night vision, which were faster, which were calmer in storms. If you ran out of horses or let one get sick, it wasn't just a failure of duty, it was a direct disruption of empire-level communication. Some horses were so valuable they were branded with the Khan's insignia, giving them the same status as state property. To steal or kill one was to commit a capital offense. Feeding them was a full-time job. Grain shipments came from nearby villages or taxes in kind. In winter, hay had to be stored in large, dry pits dug beneath the station floor or hung from the rafters in bunches, well above the snow line. In summer, the horses grazed freely, but always under watch. Being assigned to a yam station was a mix of honor and drudgery. In theory, the station keeper was exempt from taxes and could live a stable life. In practice, it was grueling, repetitive, and lonely. These keepers were usually recruited from loyal families in the region or from conquered peoples, given status in exchange for service. They lived on site, often with their families. The station was both home and workplace, and the line between the two blurred constantly. Their daily tasks included tending to horses, grooming, feeding, treating injuries, cooking for themselves and passing couriers, repairing saddles, tack, yurts, and fences, maintaining records of message traffic, watching for approaching riders and announcing them with a horn or flag. They often had to deal with bandits, especially in border regions. Stations could be robbed for horses or supplies, and couriers were occasionally murdered. That's why guard posts were sometimes assigned nearby, and military escorts might be added to high-value messages. Meals were simple: boiled millet, dried meat, fermented mare's milk, arag, and bread if they were near a farming area. A pot of stew might simmer for days, topped off with whatever was hunted or traded. The yurts were warm in winter, sweltering in summer, and layered with rugs and felt for insulation. Most had a central hearth, and soot-blackened iron kettles hung from the ceiling. Crude wooden benches lined the walls. There was no luxury, just utility. During slow periods, months might pass with no major messages. The monotony was broken only by the arrival of an official courier, often mud-streaked, haggard, but still galloping at full speed. And yet, the station had to be ready at all times. Horses couldn't be let out of condition. Supplies had to remain stocked. And every visitor was recorded, in crude ledgers kept on bark, parchment, or silk, depending on the region. To maintain discipline, imperial inspectors, often called jarguchi or daragachi, would travel in secret. They might arrive in disguise, pose as messengers, or appear with an entourage of guards. Their job was to evaluate. Did the station have enough horses? Was the food fresh? Were the riders being logged properly? Was there unauthorized use of the pesa? Ah yes, the pesa. This small metal tablet, sometimes bronze, sometimes gold-plated, marked a person as carrying the Khan's authority. With it, they could demand food, shelter, a fresh horse, or supplies. But over time, this privilege was exploited. Fake pesas were created. Corrupt officials handed them to family members. Merchants used them to move goods tax-free. By the mid-13th century, Kublai Khan had to reform the system, reducing the number of issued paisas and centralizing their production. Even then, rumors persisted of black market paisas being traded like currency across the empire. Most of the messages carried were mundane but crucial. Tax quotas. Orders for grain shipments. Troop movements. Reports on river flooding. Health of grain stocks. Schedules for court rituals. Notices of births and deaths among the aristocracy. But once in a while, a letter might change the course of an entire campaign, or the fate of a city. One could imagine a lone rider, cutting through a storm, bringing news that a rival prince had declared rebellion. Or that the Song dynasty had sent a new ambassador. Or that a census report from Samarkand had revealed a missing tithe. The weight of empire rode on these messages, and the quiet reliability of each relay station ensured it got through. Despite its design, the yam was not invincible. Over time, the fragmentation of the empire, into the Yuan in China, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Golden Horde in Russia, led to splintered systems. What had once been a unified network became regionalized, sometimes cooperative, sometimes hostile. Even within regions, local corruption, station abandonment, and interference by warlords began to weaken the relay chain. Some stations were burned during revolts. Despite its design, the yam was not invincible. Over time, the fragmentation of the empire, into the Yuan in China, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Golden Horde in Russia, led to splintered systems. What had once been a unified network became regionalized, sometimes cooperative, sometimes hostile. Even within regions, local corruption, station abandonment, and interference by warlords began to weaken the relay chain. Some stations were burned during revolts. Others simply fell into disuse as roads changed and political centers shifted. Still, at its height, the yam was one of the most quietly effective communication systems in world history. And the heartbeat of that system was not the galloping horse, but the patient, dusty station keeper, listening for distant hoofbeats, and so we're left with another question. What was it like to ride the yam yourself, to live not at a station, but in the saddle, on the road, part of the living artery of empire? The messenger leans forward in the saddle, his breath forming a cloud in the frigid morning air. Hooves pound the frozen steppe beneath him, rhythmic, reliable, and unbroken. He is alone, but he is not lost. Each turn of the trail is etched into his memory. Each station is a familiar silhouette on the horizon. The message he carries is silent, but its presence is heavy, wrapped in leather, sealed in wax, and bearing the weight of empire. He is not a warrior. He is not a noble. Yet without him, the Mongol Empire would collapse like a felt yurt in a sandstorm. The yam was more than a communication system. It was a lifeline, a nervous system, a symbol of control. And the people who rode it, lived along it, and enforced its rhythms were more than mere functionaries. They were the glue of a sprawling superpower. Riders were drawn from many groups, trained Mongol youth, Turkic steppe tribesmen, sometimes even captive subjects. From conquered regions who had proven themselves skilled in horsemanship. Some were professional couriers, hired permanently by the state, others served as part of a rotating civic duty. Their job was grueling. They rode in all weather, through sandstorms, blizzards, and battlefield zones. They carried documents in waterproof satchels, some of which were sewn into their tunics or saddlebags to prevent loss during ambushes or accidents. Many wore padded robes, layers of fur, and leather boots. Their only companions were their horses, a few weapons, and the endless steppe. Each courier might pass through 10 or more relay stations in a single day, pausing only long enough to switch horses and grab a fistful of dried meat or a ladle of fermented milk. Some even rode through the night, guided by the stars and distant torch signals. Riders had to memorize routes, landmarks, and even backup trails in case of flooding or war. Many were illiterate, but they knew the terrain like an extension of their own limbs. A well-trained courier could deliver a message 1,000 kilometers in under 4 days. That kind of speed in the 13th century was nearly unmatched in the world. Not every message was dramatic. But every message was vital. There were military orders sent from the Khan to his generals across Asia. Intelligence reports arrived from spies posted near hostile borders. Trade permissions, diplomatic letters, tax instructions, and land surveys traveled constantly. Sometimes these messages held seals of gold, the mark of the Khan himself. Other times, they were simple bundles of parchment or silk, bound with string and marked with a wax emblem. A single courier might carry documents containing the death sentence of a rebellious prince, land reassignment after a noble family's collapse, permission for a caravan of 200 camels to cross a desert, letters of introduction for a foreign ambassador, orders to summon engineers to a flood-ravaged village. Each of these things could change lives. The fate of cities might depend on how fast a message arrived. In the Mongol world, timing was often everything. At its height, the Mongol Yurts stretched across 11 time zones, linking cities as far apart as Beijing and Baghdad, Karakorum and Kiev. This was not just about internal logistics. The Yam also served as a diplomatic tool. Foreign envoys, like those from Europe, were often allowed to use the system, sometimes under escort. Marco Polo, during his travels to the Yuan court, described how the imperial postal system allowed him to travel safely and quickly over vast distances. Goods, ideas, languages, and even technological knowledge flowed along these same routes. Some historians argue the Yam helped spread gunpowder, paper currency, and even plague faster than they might otherwise have traveled. It became, inadvertently, one of the first true global information highways. But like all empires, the Yam began to erode, not from failure, but from fragmentation. After the death of Genghis Khan's successors, the empire splintered into 4 main khanates. Each tried to maintain the Yam, but cooperation broke down. Cross-border travel became dangerous. Stations near disputed regions were destroyed or abandoned. Horses were commandeered by local warlords. Corruption returned. Fake passes flooded the system. Some stations became toll points, demanding bribes. Regional governors competed for authority, disrupting standard protocols. By the late 14th century, the once seamless system had become a patchwork. Still functional in parts, but no longer global in scope. And yet, traces of the Yam remained. The Mongol Yam didn't just vanish. Its DNA can be found in dozens of later courier systems, from the Persian Chapar Khana to Tsarist Russia's Yamskoy Prikaz. In fact, the Russian word yam for their own postal relay system is a direct borrowing from the Mongols. The idea of relay stations, fresh horse rotation, official credentials, and networked communications became standard across empires. Even the Pony Express in 19th-century America echoes Mongol logistics. But perhaps the most overlooked legacy of the Yam is what it tells us about the Mongol Empire itself. That it wasn't just about conquest, but about connection. That it valued efficiency, not just force. That in the midst of an era of blood and thunder, someone thought long and hard about how to move a message from A to B. The Mongols understood something most of their contemporaries did not. Control is not just won by swords, it is maintained by information. And in that, the yam was their invisible weapon. As the final hoofbeats fade into the distance, we are left with a deceptively simple image: a horse, a rider, a message, and a trail winding across the horizon. And so we might ask, if an empire could rise and thrive on the back of a postal network, what other quiet systems have shaped history from the shadows? The cold strikes first. It seeps into your fingers before you're even fully awake, creeping past the layers of felt, wool, and leather that you've slept in. The yurt around you is quiet, save for the faint crackling of a dying fire and the breath of horses just outside. The station keeper stirs in his corner, wrapped in a woolen cloak, his hair tied up in the old steppe style. You rise without speaking. Today, like every day, you ride. You are a Mongol courier, a member of the Yem system. You don't carry a sword, but your message could change the fate of a province. You are not noble, but you speak for the Khan when you gallop under the sky. You are part of the artery system of an empire, and your job is simple: carry the message, do not delay, and arrive alive. The station keeper, a man you've seen only once before, has already prepared your next horse. She's a sturdy dun-colored mare, short, strong, and already saddled. You check the girth, the hooves, the reins. You attach your pouch to the saddle straps. Inside it, a sealed document, marked with the Khan's personal insignia, a falcon with wings spread wide. The pesa hangs around your neck, a small, bronze tablet that grants you the right to command resources across the empire. Without it, you're just another rider. With it, you are the voice of the empire in motion. You eat nothing heavy, just a strip of dried mutton, a cup of cold milk, and a bit of fermented mare's milk, arag. You might not eat again until nightfall. The wind outside is already picking up. The sky is flat, gray, endless. You pull your fur-lined gloves tight and swing into the saddle. There are no signposts on the trail, no markers carved into stone. The steppe itself is your map. You orient by stars, by memory, by subtle ridgelines and the rhythm of hills that no outsider would ever recognize. The route today will take you across 3 relay stations, roughly 100 kilometers of open land, through a shallow valley, past a frozen riverbed, and into a plain where wolves sometimes follow lone riders. Your first task is simple: reach the next station without stopping. The horse moves smoothly beneath you. She knows the rhythm. She's done this before. You let the reins go slack, lean forward slightly, and let her run. The wind is deafening. The hooves strike dry earth, then packed snow. You squint into the chill. You are not thinking, not dreaming, just riding. The horse's breath steams into the air, vanishing behind you. Time loses shape. You ride for hours like this. Sometimes you pass herders, a small caravan, the distant smudge of a village. But mostly, it is just you, the wind, and the echo of hooves. You are trained not just in riding but in endurance. There are no breaks unless the message permits it. You have carried military secrets, taxation ledgers, marriage approvals, and once, a diplomatic message to a Persian emir, sealed in 2 languages. You are not allowed to read the message. You don't know who it is for. That is not your job. But you wonder. Always. You wonder if the person who receives this message will smile. Will cry. Will curse the sky. You wonder if the ink has dried properly, if the wax will crack in the cold. You wonder how many lives might change if you were to fall, right now, and no one ever found you. And so, you ride faster. By mid-morning, the station appears on the horizon, no grand building, just a cluster of felt yurts, a wooden stockade for the horses, a flagpole bearing the imperial symbol. The keeper sees you coming and is already leading a fresh horse from the pen. You don't stop moving. As you approach, you drop the reins, dismount mid-gallop, and hand the pouch to the station official. Another man hands you the next pouch, a fresh message, bound and wrapped. Your new horse is ready, muscles twitching, ears alert. You swing up in one fluid motion, and the cycle begins again. Your pause lasted less than 4 minutes. The second stretch is harder. The sun rises behind thin clouds, and the wind starts to bite harder. The ground here is uneven, shallow ridges and frozen puddles, old streambeds you have to jump. You spot vultures circling above something far off. You do not stop to check. You pass a crumbling waymarker, a small stone pile built by travelers generations ago. A bit of old cloth tied to a stick flutters weakly in the wind. Your horse is good. She runs smooth and steady. You allow her to slow for a brief trot, then click your tongue and push her forward. She understands. You pass a caravan stopped for rest. One of the guards sees your peza, nods in deference, and steps aside to let you through. A child stares at you with wide eyes, not quite understanding what kind of man rides like this, alone, fast, silent. By early afternoon, you reach the second station. This one is more fortified, wooden walls, a watchtower, guards with spears. Something about the atmosphere feels tense. A soldier waves you down, and for the first time today, you're asked to stop. The officer checks your peza. You hand it over, cold metal in a colder wind. He squints, checks the markings, then waves you through. You hand over your message. The next one is already ready. You don't know if it's a reply, a different note entirely, or something far more urgent. You don't ask. Your next horse is taller, darker, restless. You mount and ride. The guards watch you go without a word. As the sun sinks lower, your legs are aching. You haven't spoken to anyone in hours. Your last drink was a mouthful of cold tea, scooped from a pouch at your belt. You begin to see the evening smoke of the final relay station rising over the horizon. It is a comforting sight, the end of your route for the day. You reach the station just before full dark. You dismount slowly, legs shaky from riding. Your message is taken. You are offered a bowl of broth, a place near the fire, and a heavy blanket. You sit, grateful, aching, but satisfied. Tomorrow you may ride again. Or perhaps you will rest here, wait for a return message, or be reassigned to a new road entirely. But tonight, you sleep. You are a courier of the Yam, and though no one sings your name or writes poems of your journey, you know one truth. Without you, the empire does not speak. But what happens when the trail turns dangerous, when wolves howl in the dark, when storms rise over the steppe, and when men with swords think your pouch holds gold instead of words? The trail is not always just wind and hoofbeats. It can change without warning, from serene emptiness to sudden violence. The same steppe that lets you gallop freely by day can turn hostile by night. Wolves hunt in packs. Storms arrive without notice. And sometimes, it's not nature you fear most, but other men, those who do not care for imperial symbols, or who mistake your leather pouch for silver, or who simply enjoy watching a man fall off a horse. Being a Mongol courier means more than endurance. It means survival. Because no matter how calm the sky, the Yam is not always a peaceful road. The yurt where you rest tonight is sturdy. Smoke curls from the chimney. The horses are blanketed and fed. Your boots are off, and your limbs stretch gratefully in the glow of a low fire. And yet, you do not sleep easily. Tonight you are carrying a sealed diplomatic message, orders for a provincial governor. The pouch is wrapped 3 times, tied with sinew, and marked with a personal wax seal. The station keeper, an older man with deep creases in his face, eyes the package with a mixture of reverence and anxiety. He tells you the roads ahead are not safe. There have been robbers near the river crossing, horsemen not loyal to any khan. The last courier from the west arrived missing 2 fingers. No one knows if he lost them to frost or to men. But the message must go. The empire does not stop for fear the next morning, you rise early. A snowstorm has rolled in overnight. Visibility is poor. You squint into the whiteness and see nothing but pale sky and drifting ground. Still, your next horse is prepared, thicker-haired, used to winter travel. You wrap a scarf around your face, tuck the pouch inside your coat, and ride. For 2 hours, the wind howls across the flatlands like an animal. Snow flies sideways. The horse moves carefully, her hooves crunching over ice. You bend low over the saddle, eyes half closed, mind focused only on keeping the direction true. There are no landmarks here. No distant towers or smoke trails to guide you. You steer by instinct, memory, and a few dark rocks that stand out against the snow like lost bones. You think about turning back. But you don't. Because messages don't wait. Around noon, the wind calms. The snow softens. And ahead, you spot something on the trail, a flicker of movement, a rider cresting a hill. Then another. Then 3 more. You slow your horse, hand drifting toward the small knife hidden beneath your coat. You are not a soldier. But you are not defenseless. The men wear no symbols. Their horses are worn. Their eyes are sharp. You raise your peza, hold it high above your head, a clear signal of imperial business. They approach slowly, then halt about 10 paces away. One of them calls out in a dialect you only half understand. The leader stares hard at your pouch, then at your horse. After a long pause, he nods, just once. Then they turn and ride away. You do not breathe until they're out of sight. Sometimes the peza protects you. Sometimes it paints a target on your back. You reach the next station by dusk, cold, exhausted, and sore. The station is in a border region, near a frontier fortress. Here, local governors sometimes interfere with postal operations. A minor bureaucrat, overdressed, full of self-importance, demands to see your papers. You hand him the pouch and your peza. He examines both, slowly, perhaps hoping to catch a flaw in the seal, or a worn engraving. He asks pointless questions. Where did you begin your route? How many horses have you used? Did you take the hill path or the river route? You answer politely, briefly. You've done this before. Eventually, he waves you onward, disappointed that you gave him no reason to delay you further. He hands back your message and gestures to a fresh horse. Not all danger wears a sword. Some wears silk robes and a bored expression. There is no grand climax to your journey. Only the wearing down of the body, the mind, the will. Your hands blister. Your legs cramp. You begin to mutter to yourself, counting hoofbeats or repeating lines of song your mother once sang. Your food has frozen in your pack. Your tea is gone. Your outer coat has torn. But the pouch is intact. The message is dry. The horse is alive. You keep riding. You wonder if anyone in Karakoram knows your name. You wonder if the person who receives this message will even remember the courier who delivered it. The answer is no. They won't. And yet, you ride. Because this is what the yam demands. And the yam, like the empire itself, is built not on glory, but on grit. 3 days into your journey, a blizzard catches you in a shallow ravine. You cannot see. Your horse is slipping. You are too far from any station. You find a low overhang of rock, tie the horse beneath it, and wait out the storm, huddled under your saddle, burning a page from your journal for warmth. When the storm passes, the horse is shivering but alive. You remount, heart pounding. You have not eaten in nearly a full day. You press onward. At last, the city rises on the horizon, walls of stone, smoke from hearths, guards at the gate. You present your message. It is received without fanfare. A clerk nods. The seal is broken. You are dismissed. No one claps. No one thanks you. There is no reward. You walk to the stables, remove your saddle, and ask for tea. It is hot and bitter. It tastes like the end of the world. And tomorrow, you may be asked to ride again. The Yam riders were not remembered in stone. But every stone building they helped connect, every campaign they informed, every treaty they helped deliver, was built on their saddle-worn backs. And so we must ask. What does it mean to carry history, not in books or weapons, but in silence, in solitude, on horseback, in the snow? Let us return now, not to a single courier on the road, but to the system itself. The Yam, the Mongol Empire's sprawling communication network, was more than just stations and riders. It was the circulatory system of the largest land empire in human history. Without it, the empire could never have ruled across deserts, mountains, rivers, and steppe. Without it, the Khans would have ruled nothing but silence. The final chapter of our courier's story is not about the rider, it's about what they carried, what they preserved, and what remains of that forgotten infrastructure today. If you looked at a 13th century map, there would be no dotted line for the Yam. It was not a road in the Roman sense. It wasn't paved. It wasn't stone. It shifted with seasons. It adapted to geography. It bent to the needs of the horse, not the cart. It was invisible, yet it stretched from the Yellow River to the Danube. A modern observer might ask, how can an empire survive without cities at its center? Without clear borders? Without ports or navies? The answer lies in movement. The Yam was not a monument. It was a habit. A system. A promise, that the Khan's word would arrive. Other civilizations had messengers, of course. Persia had couriers. Rome had the cursus publicus. China had imperial runners. But the Yam was different, not because it was the first, but because it was optimized for the Mongol worldview. It was nomadic in structure, but imperial in scale. Its strengths were subtle. Minimal infrastructure, no grand stone post offices. Just yurts, horse corrals, and small supplies of food and fodder. Local cooperation, communities along the Yam provided services in exchange for tax relief or protection. Some offered horses. Others staffed the stations. Some even built lookout towers. Universal access for elite riders. With a pesa, the inscribed bronze tablet, a courier could legally requisition food, horses, shelter, and escorts, no questions asked. Information discipline, messages were recorded on silk, bamboo, or bark, and many were memorized entirely to avoid interception. It was not just a message system. It was a military infrastructure, a governance tool, and a lifeline to the remote corners of the Khan's domain. One of the greatest ironies of the Yam is that it moved not just orders, but knowledge. It carried reports from spies in Persia, tax receipts from Central Asia, weather reports from Siberia, and tribute inventories from Korea. It carried maps, treaties, accusations, and poetry. Some say it even carried horoscopes for Genghis Khan's astrologers. The yam did more than spread power. It spread ideas. The Khan's court in Karakoram may have seemed isolated. But through the yam, it had access to scientific knowledge from Baghdad, papermaking innovations from China, economic reports from Kiev, and tactical notes from Vietnam, all faster than most European kingdoms could move a single troop formation. All of it handwritten. All of it on horseback. We often forget this today, but in the 13th century, horses were the internet. The Mongols maintained a rotating stock of over 50,000 horses for the yam alone. Riders would switch horses every 25 to 40 kilometers, pushing the limits of distance and endurance. A message from Karakoram to Beijing, about 1,200 kilometers, could be delivered in 3 to 5 days. From the Black Sea to Mongolia? A few weeks. And these weren't leisure rides. The average courier carried no luggage, wore a simple tunic and boots, and kept going until their message was delivered. No encryption. No stamps. Just trust, speed, and loyalty. As the Mongol Empire fractured into khanates, the yam began to crumble. Without a unified government, station upkeep failed. Local lords refused to feed riders. Roads became unsafe. Horses were requisitioned for local wars. The once glorious message system became patchy, then unusable. Eventually, parts of it were adopted by the Russian princely states, the Timurids, and the Ming dynasty, each reshaping it to suit their own needs. But the original yam, the soul of the steppe empire, was gone. And with it, the memory of the thousands of anonymous riders who once held an empire together by reins and grit. Today, almost no physical trace of the yam survives. The Mongols built with muscle, not marble. Their roads did not leave ruins. Their stations decayed into grass. Their couriers were buried with no monuments. But the idea survives, in every logistics network, every relay race, every postal system that values speed, reach, and reliability. Even in the digital age, we echo the yam. When a server pings another in milliseconds. When a message leaps a continent in under a second. When a user sends an email with no thought of delay. We are following a trail laid out centuries ago, by hooves, not cables. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine this. A single rider in a fur coat, galloping through snow. A pouch tied tightly to his chest. A whisper of hoofbeats across an empty plain. A message riding the wind. And ask yourself, what if the internet had once been made of horses, tea, and silence? You are standing in a vast open plain. No trees. No roads. No fences. Only the wind, constant, wide, and without apology. To survive here is not about comfort. It's about understanding the land. How it moves. How it breathes. How it punishes the unprepared. And at the center of this story, there stands a yurt, round, low to the ground, wrapped in layers of felt. It looks small. Simple. Forgettable. But this humble structure was the foundation of an empire. The yurt, or gur, as the Mongols called it, was not just a shelter. It was philosophy made livable. It was round because the steppe has no corners. It faced south to greet the sun. Its frame was flexible, not rigid, like the people who lived inside it. Constructed in under an hour by skilled hands, a Mongol yurt was a mobile masterpiece. A lattice wall, the kana, folded like an accordion. Roof poles, the uni, radiated from a central wooden ring, the tuno. A felt covering made from pressed sheep's wool, thick and insulating. Rope bindings woven from horsehair or yak hide. All of it collapsible, transportable, and reusable. In a world of blizzards, dust storms, and 100-degree swings in temperature, the yurt was more than shelter. It was home, fortress, palace, and chapel, all in one. How did such a simple structure beat the elements? It starts with felting, one of the oldest human technologies. Mongol families would press and roll sheep's wool for hours, sometimes days, soaking it in hot water and lard, stomping it underfoot or dragging it behind a horse to make it dense and windproof. The result? Thick felt walls that trapped warm air in winter and deflected sunlight in summer. Layered with precision, these walls could be peeled away or stacked on depending on the season. Even without chimneys, yurts stayed well ventilated. Smoke from the central hearth, a small, iron stove, would rise through the open tonneau, where it escaped like a thin ghost into the sky. There were no windows. And astrologers. To conquer a new region meant simply pitching the tent again, this time further west, or deeper south. The Mongol Empire didn't spread cities. It spread habits. And at the center of those habits was the felt-wrapped structure that kept its people alive. Now, as the fire dims and the felt holds in the heat, imagine lying inside such a yurt, a thin layer of pressed wool between you and the wind, the sky a perfect circle above, and 1,000 hoofbeats echoing in the distance. And ask yourself, can you build an empire without ever laying a single stone? Picture a morning on the Mongolian steppe. The cold seeps in like breath through a cracked door. But inside the yurt, it is quiet, dim, and warm. The woolen walls hum with the captured heat of a fire long since faded. You hear it before you see it, the soft hiss of air bubbling through milk, the rustle of robes as someone stirs. The day is beginning. And for the Mongols, the start of a day was not marked by a clock, but by a system of labor, rhythm, and ritual wrapped tightly inside their round homes. In the time of Genghis Khan, most Mongols lived not in cities or villages, but as herders. And that meant life began with the animals. A young boy would stumble from the yurt, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and run out into the cold to check the herd. Were the horses still near the riverbed? Did the yaks wander? Had the goats chewed through another rope? Meanwhile, his sister would be inside, warming sour milk in an iron pot, stirring it into a morning broth called sagaani day, white food. It wasn't glamorous. But it was rich in fat and warmth and tradition. Before anything else, before talk, before writing, before news, there was the ritual of boiling milk. The yurt was not just a structure, it was a universe for a family. Every object had its place. There were no junk drawers, no clutter. When everything has to be packed, moved, and rebuilt again and again, each item has a purpose or it's left behind. Above the stove, a leather bag might hang with cheese drying slowly over the fire. To the right, an old saddle passed down from grandfather to grandson sat quietly waiting. In the rear, a bundle of scrolls and sacred items, wrapped in lamb's wool, reminded the family of their ancestors. Each member of the family had a role. The women kept the hearth, fermented milk into arag, horse milk beer, spun wool, and tended to trade goods. The men rode out to herd, hunt, and train in combat. The children watched and mimicked, their games often little rehearsals for adult duties. And when the day's work was done, they returned to the circle. The door was bolted from the inside. The smoke hole closed. The wind howled but did not enter. It was not just a home, it was a shell against the world, carried on the backs of camels and in the hearts of nomads. In Mongol belief, the yurt was spiritually alive. The hearth fire was sacred, not just because it gave heat, but because it connected earth to sky. You didn't spit into it. You didn't throw trash into it. You didn't even point your feet at it. To do so wasn't rude, it was dangerous. Many believed spirits lived in the smoke, and to offend them meant inviting misfortune. When children were born, they were cradled in the east side of the yurt, in sunlight. When the elderly died, their bodies were taken from the west side, in shadow. The circular shape had no corners, so spirits had nowhere to hide. It was protective. It was open. It was spiritual. And even though many Mongol communities converted to Buddhism or Islam in later centuries, the yurt retained its shamanic geometry, a kind of sacred mathematics carried by hand and hoof. But the yurt was also a place of sorrow. In winter, if the fire went out, the temperature inside could fall to -40 degrees Celsius. If the felt got wet and froze, it became stiff, brittle, useless. A sudden storm could blow in and snap the roof poles. A sick horse might mean no transport. A dead cow meant no milk. A cracked stove meant no heat. And sometimes, worst of all, you had to leave the yurt behind. If raiders came, or if a flood rushed across the plain, there was no time to disassemble. Families would grab what they could, mount their animals, and watch the woolen dome vanish behind them, swallowed by wind and earth. Later, if they were lucky, they might return to rebuild, not on principle, but because that's what Mongols did. Not rebuild a house. Rebuild a center, a fire, a roof ring, a rhythm. During great gatherings, or kurultais, thousands of yurts would be set up in precise rows near the banks of a river. Here, laws were passed. Leaders were chosen. Horses raced. Poets sang. It was a mobile capital, a city with no walls and no streets, yet somehow fully functional. From a distance, the tents looked like white mushrooms, dotting the steppe like clouds come down to earth. And inside each one, diplomacy, cooking, jokes, gossip, and plans for empire. Genghis Khan himself used a yurt as his court, his war council chamber, his private refuge. In one corner, maps drawn on hides. In another, prisoners bound and kneeling. And at the center, the fire, always burning. Even the commanders of 10,000 troops lived in yurts, not stone buildings or royal tents. They slept under the same felt and wood as the herders and the cooks. And that equality, that circular humility, may have been part of why the empire held together as long as it did. Now, as you imagine lying once more beneath that round roof, listening to the crackle of dry dung in the stove and the murmur of children dreaming of horses, ask yourself, how much of a civilization can you carry on your back? When we think of empires, we think of walls, of palaces, of stone arches, of towers that pierce the sky and cathedrals that echo with the voices of kings. But the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in human history, was ruled from something softer. From structures that folded, flexed, breathed, and moved. From yurts. The empire fell. But the yurt, the simple felt dome, remains. And in that survival lies the final piece of the story. By the end of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire began to split into khanates, each ruled by a descendant of Genghis Khan, but with diverging goals, customs, and beliefs. Some settled in cities. Some adopted Persian art or Chinese administration. Some converted to Islam, others to Buddhism, others still kept to older beliefs. But regardless of these shifts, the nomadic heart pulsed on the steppe. The yurt, unlike most cultural symbols of empire, wasn't abandoned. It was never torn down, never replaced by castles or villas. Why? Because it still worked. By the end of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire began to split into khanates, each ruled by a descendant of Genghis Khan, but with diverging goals, customs, and beliefs. Some settled in cities. Some adopted Persian art or Chinese administration. Some converted to Islam, others to Buddhism, others still kept to older beliefs. But regardless of these shifts, the nomadic heart pulsed on the steppe. The yurt, unlike most cultural symbols of empire, wasn't abandoned. It was never torn down, never replaced by castles or villas. Why? Because it still worked. It kept out the wind in winter and let air flow in summer. It could be packed up and moved in under 2 hours. It used no nails. No glass. No cement. Yet it could withstand the roar of the Mongolian wind better than many houses built centuries later. To replace it would be foolish. To forget it, unthinkable. Let's take a moment to understand just how clever this structure really is. The khana, the expandable wooden wall, folds like an accordion. This allows the yurt to compress for travel, then snap open to shape a circle. The roof poles, radiating out from a central crown called the tonneau, form a dome strong enough to resist collapsing, under snow or pressure. And the felt, made from beaten and boiled sheep wool, is naturally water-resistant, flame-resistant, and insulating. No blueprints. No architects. Just centuries of trial, error, and passed-down wisdom. Mongol children grew up learning not just how to live in a yurt, but how to build one. The knowledge was not written, it was lived. And so even after the last khanate crumbled, the knowledge survived. Not because it was taught in schools, but because it was woven into daily life. Even today, millions of people across Central Asia live in yurts, in Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and parts of Siberia. Some are traditional. Made from yak wool, pine wood, and stitched leather. Others have solar panels, plastic sheeting, or Wi-Fi routers. A few have satellite dishes aimed at the sky, receiving broadcasts from cities thousands of kilometers away. But the core design has not changed. In fact, UNESCO recognized the yurt, or gur, as it's known in Mongolia, as an intangible cultural heritage in 2013. This wasn't just an award. It was a reminder that not all inventions are steel and screen. Some are made from felt and firelight. And some endure not by resisting change, but by folding into it. Today, if you were to walk the steppe in early morning, you might see smoke curling into the sky from 100 round roofs. Children still drink fermented mare's milk. Grandmothers still sit cross-legged by the stove. Old men still tell tales of wolves and warriors as the wind brushes the walls. But many yurts today stand still, not because the people have given up nomadism, but because the world has changed. Borders, economies, cities, they've hemmed in the herds and carved fences into ancient pastures. Yet even so, the yurt remains a symbol of movement, of resilience, and of being at home wherever you are. It's not grand. It's not glorious. But in its quiet genius, it might be one of humanity's greatest structures. A reminder that shelter doesn't have to be permanent to be meaningful. And that sometimes, the softest homes survive the hardest empires. So, next time you check your email, feel overwhelmed by tasks, or wish for stillness, remember the yurt. A dome of wool. A floor of earth. A fire at its heart. And the calm certainty that, whatever comes, you can pack up and carry your life with you.